Hello, everybody, and welcome to the last peer-to-peer Hangout on Air live, presented by the NAEA Museum Education Division, the last one of this academic year. So it's almost summer here in the Northern Hemisphere, and so we're excited to be done with school soon and round out our great year of Hangouts that we've presented today. So presented all year long, sorry, not today. As a reminder, the Hangouts, the peer-to-peer Hangouts are run by a volunteer crew of NAEA Museum Education members, and we always want to hear from our viewers. So please let us know if you have ideas for future Hangouts, and we want to make sure that we're meeting your needs. We also want to make sure that we're touching on the topics that are most pertinent to you. I do hope everybody, if you haven't gotten to see some this year, that you go back into our archives. If you go to our Google Plus page and look on our YouTube section there, you can find it, or look for our YouTube page. You can find all the past Hangouts that we've done. There's quite a few at this point. And again, if you have ideas for new Hangout topics, please let us know. You can contact us via the page on the NAEA Museum Education website, also through our Google Plus page. So I'm Julienne Chevalier. I don't know if I said that yet. I'm the head of interpretation and participatory experiences at the Minneapolis Institute of Art, and along with Mari Robles have been co-chairing the Hangouts this year. It's been a lot of fun, and I think everybody who's participated as presenters, as observers, as question askers, etc. It really is a team effort. So before we get going on the topic of leadership in museum education, I want to remind everybody about the Q&A feature. So this is the opportunity for you, the viewer, to ask questions. So there's a little, depending on what format your Hangout takes, it's different on PC and Macs and versus using it on your phone or your tablet. There should be a Q&A icon. It's a little kind of teal rectangle that has the letters Q and A in it. And then there should be a space for you to type in your question. So you can type in your question and everybody will be able to see it. And then there's the opportunity, if you like what somebody else has asked, you're interested in the same topic or the same question, to click the +1 or click the plus whatever number it is. And those that get the most likes basically will rise to the top of the list. So I think that's basically everything. I'm going to turn things over to Jen DePrizio, who's going to lead the conversation today.
Okay, great. Thank you all for joining us. I'm really excited to be talking to you about this topic of leadership in museum education. I know that for myself, it's something that comes up, and we keep having these conversations at conference and throughout the year. So I'm really excited to talk to you about it today. And I wanted to introduce the colleagues that I'm joined with. Unfortunately, we were having a little tech issue where their lower third of their screen was not cooperating, and so you don't see their names, but I have Amy Davis. Do you want to wave, Amy, so people know which one you are? There you go. Amy Davis, who's the Director of Education and Community Partnerships at the Monterey Museum of Art. And I also have Amanda Thompson Rundahl, who is the Director of Learning and Engagement at the St. Louis Museum of Art, here with us today. So I asked Amy and Amanda to join me, and the reason I was interested in talking about this, not because we're putting it right out there that we think we are leadership in museum education experts, be-all, end-all voice on the topic, but it's a topic that we have found that we are just really connected to the kinds of issues that we're all dealing with, and we all are coming at it from a place of learning, in a place that we think the only way that we can all improve our skills and think about these issues is to keep talking about it. So please ask questions as we go along, and we have some things that we want to I have some questions I'm going to be posing to the group and have us kind of get out there, but then think about the questions that you might have for us. So I really encourage you to use the Q&A feature. So this past year at the conference, some of you may have attended a session that I did about transformational leadership. So I recently have taken on the position of head of learning and interpretation at the Portland Museum of Art in Portland, Maine. And so it's my first foray into being a department head. And so I really have been thinking about leadership issues my whole career, but then being put in a seemingly leadership position, and it is one, that I've really started reading and thinking about these things. So I've been thinking about this particular issue of transformational leadership, and I think when you hear us talk about some of the issues, a lot of it's going to make sense. And so just as a framing, I'm coming at it from a point of view that as a leader, I do not see myself in a transactional mode. So if you kind of have two opposites, transactional leader is one who says, do what I ask you to do, and I will reward you. You will get a raise, you will get moved up, all of those things. Whereas the transformational leadership model is really about enacting having a vision, articulating it, enacting it, and bringing people along with you. And so when I was thinking about this topic and what I know about Amy and Amanda and their work and the kinds of things that they've been doing, and we've all kind of taken over a department around, we've all been doing this for about the same time as department heads, we had a lot of commonalities. So we're just going to kind of deal with and put out some issues and challenges we've been dealing with, and then open it up to conversation. And also as we go through, I hope the examples and challenges and successes that we share, you will find applicable to your work regardless of wherever you are, because we all really believe that, and we all should think about leadership at whatever level we're at in our position in our institutions. We're not saying that just because we happen to be 3 department heads that everything we're saying is only applicable to that kind of role. We'll talk a little bit more about what that means as you move throughout your career. So we're going to kind of go back and forth, so hopefully we won't move too fast when you see our faces pop up back and forth. But one other issue before we each introduce ourselves through a story is you may notice as we go along, and something that I've been thinking a lot about is management versus leadership. I think we often use those terms synonymously, whereas I think of leadership as kind of the visionary piece. It's what inspires, and the management piece is the execution piece, and it's what stabilizes an organization. To be a really successful organization, you have to have strength in both of those areas, but I think the terms are used, leadership and management can be used synonymously, and so we're actually, as we talk about our work, we're going to toggle back and forth and try to suss out when we're talking about the leadership piece and when we're talking about the management piece and when we're actually talking about both of them. So it might be a little ambiguous and a little messy, but hopefully it'll make sense. So I thought as a way of us each introducing ourselves and where we're coming from, that we would each tell a story about when we felt like a leader. When was the moment, when was one moment in our career when we felt like, oh wait, I'm a leader? What did it feel like? What was the circumstances? So I'm going to have Amy start off and tell her story.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Jen, for that wonderful introduction. I wanted to tell you a little bit about an episode that happened recently where I thought, wow, this sort of model of more transformational leadership versus transactional leadership is really starting to pay off. It was the other day when we're trying to make a new hire, and it's a new position in our department, and we're really kind of looking towards strategically hiring this person who will hopefully become more of a leader themselves one day at our museum. And one of my directs is actually the one making the hire, and she came to me and said, gee, Amy, who should I make the offer to? And I said, well, what do you think? And she then pretty much gave me, a measured, thoughtful response that was more of a transformational leader, contained transformational leadership qualities in her response. And so I thought, wow, it's really clear that this person's putting this careful thought into their decisions, and I've seen this person in particular blossom in this way over the past few months especially, and I feel like I'm enabling another leader, so that really made me feel like a leader in that moment. And I know, Amanda, you're going to talk a little bit about when you started at St. Louis Art Museum.
Yeah, thanks, Amy, for that handoff and inspirational story to get us started. Um, it's interesting when Jen and Amy and I were thinking about this conversation and trying to pinpoint one story. There are, of course, number of moments, and I think to Jen's point, that this idea that we all have leadership opportunities throughout our career. So the one chosen to share with you today happens to be right after I arrived here in St. Louis as the Director of Learning and Engagement. So it's at a fairly recent point in my career, but I think it's exemplar of the kinds of things that we might all experience in other moments. So right after arriving here, in fact, on my first day, which is almost exactly 2 years ago now, I had my first day, and those days of meeting tons and tons of people and being toured around, and it's a blur of names and faces by the end of the day, and you've got information overload and trying to just process. And I'd been in my previous job for 16 years, so I think it's hard to prepare yourself for what that sort of drinking water from a fire hose experience is going to feel like. And I think, probably a little bit exhausted. I'm sure a lot exhilarated, and really was excited about this great new team I was here to lead and work with. And one of the kind of junior staff members of the team came into my office at the end of the day and just said, "Hey, I just wanted to, tell you I hope you had a great day, and we're so glad you're here." She said, we really needed you. We really need a rudder." And I thought to myself, a rudder? Not sure that's really the kind of metaphor I would have, if asked to choose something to kind of metaphorically represent my role as a leader. I'm not sure that's the one I would have necessarily come up with on my own. But in reflecting on that, I really thought to myself, I thanked her, of course, and then really thought to myself, if that's what that individual staff member needs from me, is someone to provide a kind of steady, stable, consistent, presence in this division. There had been a long absence, a long gap between my predecessor's departure and my arrival. Then sure, I can be your rudder. I think I said back to her, if that's what you need, that's what I'll be. And I think for me, that was that feeling, one of a huge sense of responsibility as a leader and a manager. I guess I would think about both in that context. And then also a reminder that really every individual staff member or volunteer who you supervise might need something different from you. And that's what that one staff person needed from me. And I was so grateful that she expressed that to me. And so that was just a really good, it felt good, but also a great reminder of that way that I aspire to lead and manage is on a very kind of individualized basis.
So I will tell my story, which I asked this question of everyone else, and for like 2 weeks I've been racking my brain to come up with what I thought was the best example. And I'm actually going to pull an example that just happened this past Friday. We here at the Portland Museum of Art have really been undergoing a lot of institutional transformation and really rethinking the way that we connect with our community. And so that's a lot of what I've been doing for the last year and a half, is figuring out how we can connect with constituencies that we haven't traditionally been reaching, and thinking about bringing new audiences and new voices into the museum. And so we currently have an exhibition of Edward Curtis's photographs from his North American Indian series. And if you are familiar with this or know of it, it can be quite controversial in terms of how it's perceived. So it's images that Curtis took as a way of documenting Native people, and in the Native community, there's a range of responses to it, from people thinking these are beautiful images that look like me and my ancestors are represented in an institution, to here's a white man basically trying to quote unquote capture traditional Native life, and there's so much problematic in that. And so when we were thinking about our programming for this, it was like, well, we should just deal with this issue head on, right? It's a little uncomfortable. It's not really art history, but I was really encouraged by our division head and by our director that we should really be thinking about different kinds of programming that not only stems from our art base, but then also really connects with our community. And so we put together a panel. They were not artists, so it was two folks, two of our colleagues from the Abbey Museum up in Bar Harbor, Maine, which really deals with and educates on Native peoples here in Maine, as well as an anthropologist and as well as someone representing a tribal commission group here in Maine. And it was an emotional program. I admit I got teary a few points, and it's just a really great program. And the auditorium was full of people, many who I've never seen at a program. And someone came up to me at the end and they said, you know, I don't think the museum would have done this program 5 years ago. I don't know what you guys are doing in there, but what you're doing is great for the community. And so I felt like it was this moment of this vision and this idea that I had that I put out there and said, okay, this might work, this might not work, that the audience and the people that we were trying to reach recognize that. And so for me, that moment of leadership within the community and figuring out how my role as the head of an education department can help push forward ideas in our community. So that's my recent example. So I hope that gives everyone that's listening and watching a little bit of sense of the kinds of things and issues that Amy, Amanda, and I are thinking about as we think about issues of leadership. So I'm going to transition us to our next question. And so if you see me looking off to the side, it's because I'm looking at my notes on my screen. I'm not doing anything funny over there. But as I said, we've each taken the helm of a department in the last 2 years, and we realize we're actually, pretty in sync with taking on these issues in our department. And we've all made some significant changes to our departments. And as I think the examples also gave you that we're actually trying to change our institutions as well. And so, but I think from wherever you are in your career, a key component of being a leader, whether it's overseeing a particular program or overseeing a department or overseeing volunteers, is about developing a vision, figuring out how to communicate that, and as educators we have that skill to do, and then how do we enact that, right? How do we put that into play? So what I want us to do now is for us to each talk a little bit about how we've attempted to actually have a vision, articulate it, and try to bring others along, because I think that's the key component. You can come up with any idea and put a stake down and say, we're going to do this. But we all know, we've probably all had examples, that could be in our challenge section of the discussion, that isn't necessarily the best way to proceed. So we're going to talk a little bit about some examples of successes and some challenges that go with that, connected to this idea of bringing other people along. So I'm going to turn it over. I think Amy is going to go first.
Great, thanks, Jen. Gosh, yeah, I mean, I'm already feeling inspired in different ways, and I just feel like kind of what you were saying earlier, that it's always a journey, and we're always learning new things and new approaches to how we can be better leaders and better models for people. And when I first started working here at the Monterey Museum of Art, I noticed right away, I kind of came in with both arms swinging. I have to admit, I was very excited and very motivated to make a lot of changes, and I think I was kind of naive that all of those changes would go over just so well, and there would be no hiccups along the way. And I realized that you're definitely going to have people that align with you and people that don't, and it's important to involve all of your stakeholders in the planning process and constantly invite feedback to changes that you want to make. And when I came on board, there were some changes I wanted to make, specifically with the docent program. It's a program that has been, of course, with the Monterey Museum of Art, as many of us, for decades, and they'd actually had a few years of complete autonomy and lack of leadership, and I wanted to get involved right away and try to earn trust right away. And I think even with my measured approach, I felt I got some resistance, and I determined pretty early on that I needed to be very slow and steady with this particular group of people, and try to make changes in a much more measured, basically very slow way. And 2 years in, one of my priorities was at first wow, I really need to focus on their gallery teaching, and I learned quickly that really it was the underlying structure of the program that needed attention first. And so I have to tell you that I haven't made any substantial changes to their teaching, but I've been able to prioritize their overall structure and working behind the scenes, working with docent leaders, listening to them to make some important changes that hopefully pave the way for more changes in the future. However, my staff, they were ready for change. They were burning out from a lack of structure, and they were reinventing the wheel with a lot of different programs, especially our Family Day program. It was just a lot of unnecessary work to kind of reinvent the wheel every time. And so I really prioritized procedural changes at that point. And like I said, constantly inviting their feedback. And, you know, I didn't have as deep of an understanding of the program as they did. I just got here. So that was a really wonderful example of kind of bringing others along, was that I was realizing, and I think, Amanda, you just brought this up, that you have to be different things to different people. You have to lead different people differently. And so that I thought that was a good lesson in that approach. So Amanda, I know you're going to talk about someone who gave you some good advice a little while ago about this effectively bringing others along idea.
Yeah, and I don't know, maybe she's out there listening. So Melora McDermott Lewis, who's at the Denver Art Museum and whose work I've certainly admired and respected for a very long time, a number of years ago now, probably more than 5, I would say, I made a trip to Denver and met with Melora and some of her staff. And I was in, at that time, what was for me a new position when I was still at the Minneapolis Institute of Art. And I was taking on the head of interpretation role, and which was a function that hadn't really recently existed there. So there's a lot of change making going on, a lot of establishment of relationships and practices, in particular working with the curatorial staff. And I was sort of struggling with that. I felt like some people were really on board to work collaboratively on interpretation and digital media and those sorts of things that I was really excited about doing, and others were less willing and even sometimes resistant or outright unwilling to work in partnership with an educator on exhibitions and installations. And so I was, I think, articulating that for Melora and trying to understand the way that work was being done in Denver. I thought was quite effective and at least from outside appearances really productive. And she really said to me, and I'm paraphrasing now, I'm not sure of the exact words, but I've repeated this many times to myself and to other people since, this advice of, really find someone who's a willing collaborator, co-conspirator, partner, who's willing to work in the way that you want to work, or on something that you're excited about doing and you feel is in keeping with the mission and the goals of the institution, and then work with that person or persons. Don't feel like you have to be all things to all people, or that the nature of leadership is messy. It's not that everyone just falls, especially transformational leadership, I think. People don't just fall in lockstep behind you and do as you do. That there is this relationship building that needs to happen, and that by investing in the relationship with perhaps one or a small number of individuals with whom you're working on a defined project, and demonstrating the good work that can come from that kind of collaborative work, that others will often come around, that they'll see that, wow, working collaboratively between education and curatorial really produces a more engaging, informative, what have you, whatever adjectives you want to use, exhibition or experience. And so often then people who are maybe resistant to that approach, in this example in particular, might come around and be more open to the change or the new approach or the new idea. So that has proven borne out a number of times in my career on a whole variety of projects. I think it really was invaluable advice, and I have her to thank for that. So.
And I think as I'm listening, I'm also keeping an eye on the questions that are coming up, and so I think I can address a couple of them as I transition into my comments about how I have a vision, enact it, and communicate that. So, this idea of transformational leadership, there's some questions about what exactly is that, and that could be a whole Google Hangout plus, plus, plus. So one resource that I would recommend if you're curious about exactly what that theory and idea is about, the sort of person who coined the term is James McGregor Burns. And I can work with Julene, and we can work with folks to figure out how to share some resources that we have about that. But it's basically this idea, exactly this idea that we're kind of addressing. You create a vision, you articulate it clearly, and then you work closely with colleagues to do it together. And you operate from a place that everyone can be successful, not from a place that, oh, let's hope these people all come along with me, but really from a genuine place. And so that's why, for me, it really is applicable to museum education, because as we think about the skills that we're using as museum educators, we're really good at finding abstract and concepts and making them concrete for people, at understanding the importance of open communication and seeing multiple points of view. And so I think if you want to kind of dig into that, we weren't going to address the whole theory, but I would look up Burns and transformational leadership, and you'll find lots of articles online, and there's books and all of this stuff. So, but my example is to think about how you actually have a vision. So when I came into the department, I was like, well, I need to write a vision statement, right? It's like, what are we doing? And I think about it as, why do I come to work every day? So I spent many, many days and hours crafting this perfect, what I felt like was perfect words, perfect sentences, but it's a paragraph. And so that doesn't roll off my tongue, and I can't, on a daily basis, walk around kind of spouting this idea to everyone across the museum. So then the key part of it for me was to then think of what are the two big ideas that are actually in the vision statement, and have those as catchphrases that we use around our department, and that I've actually heard others in the museum using. So, for me, it's this big, long statement came down to, there's more than one way to look at a work of art, and meet people where they are. And I think to some of the other questions that are coming up too, about how from any level of your position can you take some of these lessons. So if you're overseeing a particular program, right, you can have your vision for that program, and you can figure out, and I don't want to call it a tagline, an elevator pitch, but that's what I think of, those two phrases that resonate with everything that we're doing. But when I'm in a meeting with a curator who's writing labels, and we're talking about the labels and what that content's going to be, and he's like, well, I want to do this and this because, I really want to get across this idea that, you're trying to get across, that there's more than one way to look at a work of art. And so when I hear a curator in my museum actually using the same phrasing that we're doing, I realize that I'm getting somewhere in communicating my idea and how to bring others along. And I feel like I might be a broken record. Maybe that's why it starts to stick with people. And I think, to build on Amanda's point of finding your allies, finding those people within your institution who seem open to kind of hearing new ideas, and seem open to coming along with you and building those ally relationships. And then, as she said, as people see that working well, it's, people start to come along with you. And finding out ways to bring people into the process, again, as opposed to this idea that I'm just going to put down my flag with my vision on it, and it's outside my door, and everybody should know it, and they should just all, understand that. I have a very practical example that has to do with clothespins. Yes, clothespins in an art museum. So we have a new interactive space here in the museum that we call the workshop, and it's a place where visitors can, it's a hands-on space, and so we had an activity where we wanted, when the visitors finished their drawing, to be able to clip it up with a little clothespin. And there were concerns about what nasty things were visitors going to do with clothespins around the museum. Now, granted, it's next to a cafe space where there's forks, but nobody's worried about that. So my clothespins were, this big to do. So basically, we sat down with the registrar. We did a mock-up of 8 different potential clips. And we kind of walked through a giant clothespin to a mini clothespin to a binder. We got more scary things too, to a binder clip and all these things. And she kind of, when she saw them, and we actually worked through this process of what is the best option and why did we need this, and why did we need this particular material, she came on board, and we've actually since that moment really built within my team a really good working relationship with her. When we're trying to figure something out, we actually go to her early in the process and say, we need your help in making this happen, as opposed to, I think sometimes in education we can have this sense of we're fighting against the rest of our museum to make it accessible. But if we operate from a place that everyone in our museum wants visitors to have a good experience, and we work with them from the ground up, you actually have much more success. I mean, we're having mannequins with fashion created by teens next to the paintings in the galleries, which when we first thought of this idea, we thought, oh my God, nobody's going to say yes to this. But we worked with our colleagues from the beginning before we ever decided to do it. So thinking about the ways that you can actually connect with your colleagues in genuine ways to bring them on to where you are. So the next thing I wanted to talk a little bit about is this idea that as museum educators, we actually have the skills that we need to be leaders. So much of what I was just mentioning about communication and about working with others, we operate from a place that learning is important, both for ourselves and for other people. And so we have these skills. And so we each have a couple thoughts, ideas about what I think we each have 2 essential leadership qualities that, as we think about our work, really inform the way that we think about what we're doing. So I'm actually going to ask Amanda to talk a little bit about the 2 essential leadership qualities that she thinks, and comment on those.
Great, thanks, Jen. So the 2 that I highlighted, and there are of course many that you could choose from, and there are a number of articles if we share resources afterwards that really highlight this idea of what are kind of 21st century leadership skills in business in general. So there's lots of reading out there, but 2 that I find that resonate really with me are adaptability and self-awareness. And I think about, especially in the dynamic kinds of environments that we work in art museums or in museums in general, that every day is different. Every day presents a different set of opportunities and challenges. And so as a leader, there's a real, I guess I would pair adaptability and agility sort of together. This need to be able to pivot, to be able to respond to, if you want to advance a vision or take advantage of opportunities, to be able to relatively quickly be able to adapt and respond, whether it's to a sudden opportunity that pops up that you want to take advantage of because it meets the needs of an audience that you're trying to work with, or whether, I think a little bit later in the conversation today, I'll talk a little bit about sort of cultural transition between institutions. So I think about in my own experience coming from Minneapolis to St. Louis, being adaptable to the environment in which you are operating, so that you're aware of what the norms and sort of conditions are in which you're working. So I just think that ability to see multiple pathways, opportunities, and be willing to not always take a straight line point A to point B approach to something is really important. I found that when I've been open to other possibilities of how we might approach something, that the end product is usually better. So I think adaptability is really critical in that way. And then paired with that really closely is self-awareness. So knowing really where your blind spots are. I know that the sort of business side of the work that we do in art museums, looking at the financial audit of the art museum, which we actually just did here with our department heads across the institution this morning, is not my wheelhouse. It's not my skill set. So I know that that's a blind spot that I have, or an area in which I'm not as confident or as comfortable. So then I actually need to spend more time if I'm going to be a successful leader and manager in making sure that I have a better understanding around what's not my comfort area. So so actually spending time meeting with our finance department and asking questions, even though they might seem like silly questions to them, about that balance sheet, so that I have a larger understanding of the organization and its resources, even though that's not really where my primary interest lies. I know that in the bigger picture, if I want to garner resources and be able to advance the things that the vision that we're articulating here together with my team, that I need to understand what the institutional resources are to be able to garner those resources. So being aware of that, using that one example of an area in which I'm not as experienced or proficient, and then really putting more effort or emphasis there, even though it might not be the thing you really want to be working on or the thing that you like most about your job. It's essential to be a well-rounded leader to have that understanding. So I think Amy's got the next two to share.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. So I think, our essential qualities, I think, interweave a lot. So forgive me if I end up repeating some of the things you brought up, but I think that just is a testament to how useful they are as characteristics. So I wanted to talk a little bit about humility and space making in particular. And with the idea of humility, admitting when you're wrong or being vulnerable is considered a weakness, I think, sort of conventionally. And I think that's really interesting, and I don't necessarily think like we need to put our hearts on the line all the time, but I think there's kind of a lack of humanity in what we do sometimes, and having just really open conversations and admitting when you're confused or when you don't necessarily know the answer. It's a balance, though. Like, you don't want to undermine yourself, but I think it gives you credibility and it gives you humanity to show that you're still learning and that you're open to new information and letting new experiences guide you. And it can be a balancing act for sure, because you don't necessarily want to just have your emotions guide you all the time, but I think it's a good way to connect with people, to admit when you don't know or when you're confused. And then with space making, I first learned about this term at Nina Simon's 2011 AM session called Empowering Staff to Take Creative Risks. And I was just like, what? When I heard this term, and just, allowing people to take on projects and fail, and that failure's okay, I don't know, that was a new idea for me, I have to tell you. And when I came to my current position, I oversee not only education, but visitor services, security, the museum store, among some other critical areas. And I realized really quickly that I couldn't follow my type A inclinations and do everything. Like, I had to make space for other people on my team to take on projects. And so we took some leaps with that, and I think it's really paid off, and people rise to the occasion, and you realize that failure can be okay, that people shouldn't be penalized if a program doesn't work out perfectly. I think it's just, okay, what's the follow-up conversation about what worked and what didn't, and what can we learn for next time? So, that space-making approach has been a very valuable thing for me, and not just in managing people, but, in so many things in general. For myself, like, make space for yourself to fail sometimes too, and don't beat yourself up about it. Just be reflective and self-aware, like what Amanda was talking about. So Jen, I know you're going to tell us about some qualities that are useful for you.
Great, thanks, Amy. And as Amy said, they do all kind of interconnect. So again, I think you'll hear some ideas reinforced. But the things that I have been thinking about is communication and trust related to communication. And I know some questions are coming up about how leadership is cultivated within your team. And so I think, that's part of my role as a supervisor. And I remember actually an article that Amy wrote on the NAEA Viewfinder. I think there was a quote in there that, about one of your roles as a leader is to build other leaders. You're not trying to build followers, you're actually trying to create more leaders. And so I think the communication and the way that you work with any of your colleagues or work with anyone that's working for you or with you is about really being open about the kinds of conversations that we're having. And understanding where you need to push your staff. So again, if we go back to the previous question about, having a vision and acting that vision, making sure people understand the big idea that they're all working towards. And again, it builds on Amy's idea of being a space maker. When do we let people just kind of go at it, and when do we push? And I can give a specific example in this new hands-on space that we have. Our gallery educator for gallery learning is just one of the most creative people I've ever met, and had this amazing, had this idea about an activity related to birds and texture and paper collage, and it just was not, I just was not working for me. And so we had many conversations about it. And I just kept pushing back to her, okay, why that? Why that approach? Let's just really think about it. And she was like, well, I really think this is what we should do. I said, okay, all right, let's let it sit. I want you to think about it. Think about the questions I've asked you. She didn't have to answer them all in front of me. She went off and, really dug through and made prototypes of 3 different things. And we came up with a project that we're both happy with, and still, I feel like still meets the needs and goals of our department and still takes into account her creativity. But I trusted that she was hearing the kinds of things that I was saying and giving some that direct feedback. And I think as you're working with people that are working for you or with your colleagues, that direct and open communication that then builds trust is really important. So when you need to give some feedback that maybe needs to push things in a different direction, people are open to it. And the other thing that I would add that has been a challenge for me and that I've been trying to really work with my team on is being realistic. I know that doesn't sound very glamorous. And this is where, for me, that intersection of leadership and management come into play. I think we as educators, I know myself, as Amy said, her type A personality, we want to do everything and we're so enthusiastic, but how we actually set achievable goals. Because if we set our expectations too high, and I'm not to say that we don't have high expectations, but if we set them beyond our human and our hard resources, then we're setting ourselves up to not be as successful as we could be. And so really being realistic about the kinds of things that we can do, and this will transition to the next point we'll talk about, but for me then as a leader and as a manager of staff, that I feel like that's an important role that I have. And I'm also, sort of noticing the questions and trying to address them as we go along. There's a number of questions that are coming up about how at every level, how can you be leading? If anyone has any experience working with docents and volunteers or interns, I have managed docents for 15 years, and I'm not going to talk about them today because they're a bit of a challenge for me sometimes in my new role in this institution, but that my experience with working with a group of museum teachers and docents at the Gardner Museum for 8 years taught me, that was where I learned the most about leadership and management skills, actually working with a group of volunteer docents. So in those experiences, I think as Amy's example, that's where we get, a lot of us as museum educators get that leadership and that management experience. So if you're in that kind of position, you're working with volunteers of any kind or contract educators, just be conscious of the fact that you're actually getting all of those skills that you will eventually want to put into play if you become, a leader of paid staff. So I wanted to note that as we were moving along. So I think I'm going to kind of go to our last question, and then we can, because I know there are some other questions I want to make sure we do. So maybe if we can all keep our examples short. But one of the things that we want to talk a little bit about some challenges, I think, and thinking about priorities and expectations, which kind of leads from the previous question. For me, we have no shortage of ideas. None of us. I think all of our teams, all of our colleagues, we have so many ideas. And one of the things that I'm trying to do is really cultivate and empower the team that I have working for me. And it's a lot about this open communication, that's about trust, that's about being honest, that's about being human, flexible, all of the things that we just talked about. But also just, not wanting to, just because I am the department head, I'm sure we've all been in that situation where you're quote unquote boss, you had an idea, you were so enthusiastic, and you went in trying to, advocate for it, and someone said, nope, we don't have the money or the time to do that. And it just ended there. And so even though sometimes that may be what's in my head, I never say that to anyone, and I would never say that to anyone, but I really try to work closely with my team to figure out, okay, if that's really what we want to do, then let's look at all the other things we're doing, and let's figure out what might we need to pull back on. And I want to give props to my colleague Paula Lynn of the National Gallery, if she's on. She gave a presentation at the 2015 NAEA about planning and the way that the education department at the National Gallery is approaching this, and it became a model. So now, when anyone on my team has an idea, we actually have a planning document that we use. So it's you articulate the goals. It's basically a program proposal, and I'm sure lots of people do this, but it's not something that I had really been doing in my work, and I know that it's been so useful for us as we've changed a lot of programs that we actually did it for the program that already existed, and people have done it for the program that they wanted, and we're able to make the case, and we actually use those documents across the institution. So it's, it's been really useful for us. So that's one example about priority setting. And so I know that Amy was going to touch on that a little bit as well.
Yeah, so talking about priorities, when the situation shifts a lot, especially in an institution that's undergoing a lot of transformation, you're kind of constantly recalibrating priorities. At least I am, and it can be a little difficult to sort of like switch gears a lot and go, okay, this is my new priority, or that's my new, or keeping an eye on those bigger picture priorities when things are shifting around. And especially when that shift has to permeate your team. You have a new mandate, and now you need to kind of bring the team on board to perform whatever that new mandate is. So Jen and I actually talked a lot about this, trying to achieve kind of twofers, or kind of maximizing the situation the best you can. And I'll try to come up with a decent example of kind of like taking the two priorities, like the priorities of the thing you were going to do and the thing that's new, and trying to mesh them so that you're getting to do both, but you're not having to do two completely different things. So I'll try not to get too much in the weeds with this example, but we had this giant offsite festival that was supposed to appeal to multi-generational audiences. It was an attempt to kind of bring the museum outside the walls into the community, and so we were doing. It was this giant effort. I mean, if those of you who do offsite programming, I mean, it's like you're like hauling all your stuff and working with the venue and all this stuff, and then suddenly I had this mandate to create these giant murals for a fundraiser and all the parameters were murals, like children's murals. And so honestly, I took some of the, we needed an activity for this outside the walls program anyway, so we decided, me and the team, we talked about it, we decided that, okay, we're going to have a mural project at this festival that will then be used at this fundraiser down the road, sort of instead of having to come up with two separate things. I hope this example makes sense, but I was particularly proud of it because I sort of was so overwhelmed with the old mandate and the new mandate and trying to get them to mesh. And so I feel like I'm doing that all the time, and I work with my team to do that. Like, okay, now we have this new thing we have to do. How are we going to achieve our vision and prioritize both things, but not completely wear ourselves out in the process?
So I think this can be a really hard thing to do. I think to the point of, wanting to make room, make space for new things, and then letting go of some other things in the process. I love Amy's idea of sort of trying to combine those two things, and get the best of both worlds. I am actually in the midst of a real sort of challenge at the moment, where there's a program that's been in place here for a number of years, and I think that was one that when I came in 2 years ago, quickly sort of rose to the top of the list as being one that had outlived its lifetime as a program. And many of you work in museums that have been around for a long time. It's sort of like once something gets started, it can be really hard to stop it, because it's either someone's personally attached to it. Their sort of identity as a staff member is so interwoven to the program because they developed it or they've shepherded it for a long time, and or because there's an audience that's, even if it's if you have a clear rationale for why it doesn't make sense anymore, there are people who will be affected by the fact that you stop doing the program. In any event, I'm not going to give the specifics of the example because we've not yet decided what to do about it, but there is a program here that I've literally been trying to sort of kill since I arrived, and it has been, everyone agrees sort of on principle that the program is done, but it's been really difficult to actually garner the sort of institutional momentum to be done with it. And it's not just something that I think those of us who work in these sorts of complex institutions, even if I might, as the Director of Learning and Engagement, and it's a learning and engagement program, be ready to put it to bed, there are all sorts of other competing interests and priorities involved. And so I think that's where there was a question earlier about kind of cross-departmental or cross-functional collaboration. And I think, so one of the other really critical things I think about this kind of work, no matter what level that you're working at or what your leadership role is, whether it's formal or informal, is that awareness of how your decision impacts the sort of interests or priorities of other entities or individuals within the museum or without. So this program in particular has a very shrinking, but loyal audience, and a number of those audience members are quite influential in terms of being volunteers, donors, members, those sorts of things. So if anybody has the magic bullet for me and how to just finally wrestle this thing to the ground, I would love to chat with you offline. Because it's one that I'm sort of in the midst of at the moment, and it's hard. It's really difficult, one, to find something that you were willing to stop doing, and then to actually stop it. So yeah.
So of course we had way more planned to talk about than we actually have in an hour, and I'm just conscious of the fact that it's 1:52 already, which means we have 8 minutes left. And so we had also planned to talk a little bit more about challenges, but I think we've actually hit on quite a few of them as we've been going along in the conversation. And so I'm just scrolling through the questions, and one that I think might be good for us to, the three of us, tackle. Looks like our colleague David Bowles in New York put up the link, and also if everyone's, as you're watching, there have been a number of links put up about transformational leadership, but David actually notes a recent blog post, which is what got me thinking about leadership versus management. And there's a line in it, and he basically asks if we would each talk a little bit about the relationship between stability and disruption, right? So as a leader, the quality is that you are disrupting things, right? You want to make change, you're really pushing people, and then as a manager, you're meant to kind of execute and stabilize and kind of make things more realistic, if you will. So Amy or Amanda, does someone want to jump in and start? I'll go to Amanda.
Oh, okay.
Sure. Well, it's interesting, the question of stability, I think, versus disruption, especially going back to my first example of when I really recently, or the example I shared of being a leader, when the staff person thanked me for being the rudder, right? That's the stability. That's, there'd been such a long gap in leadership that I think there was a real craving of consistency, of continuity, and so there's that, and my initial response was, oh, I'm not really sure that that's the style of leadership or the quality I was thinking about in terms of myself as a leader. So so there's acknowledging that, I think, and being that, I think being constant, being consistent, being clear in your communications. Those are the kinds of qualities I think about when I think about being stable. It's being fair. It's being trying to know where your biases might be, and not to lean too heavily in one direction or the other. And then the disruption comes. I mean, the things are sort of the things that you're really compelled to do. I mean, the places where it makes sense to be disruptive, I guess, are around those things that can really perhaps help to advance that larger vision, or those that sort of leadership that you have been tasked with bringing to the organization. So I think that I feel like leadership and management require both, and where there's some things that I feel like being disruptive maybe isn't necessarily beneficial to the cause. Sometimes there are things that just, if they're humming along and working fine, then why bother? And then there are other things that you might really be worth sort of being more disruptive about, I guess, if that makes sense. I'm thinking of an example here where there was a practice of making a lot of interactives, very expensive interactives, and that was working fine for the organization, but it was a resource suck on lots of levels in terms of dollars, time involved in managing outside vendors. So there was really nothing, it was working fine, but it really didn't feel like the best investment of time and resources. And so collaborating with our director of IT, we proposed something that sounded pretty radical, was fairly disruptive, and that was to say, we're just going to stop. We're going to step back. We use the language moratorium. We're putting a moratorium on interactive development, even though it's the kind of thing that I really was keen about working on, the kind of thing I wanted to really do. And that was very disruptive to our visitors, frankly, because we stopped making this content that we had been feeding them, but we just needed to step back and say, hold on, we need to sort some things out here. And so that's an example of when it really made sense to be disruptive. What we were doing was not sustainable financially or otherwise. So in that instance, the disruption seemed worth the discomfort that it would cause.
Thank you. Amy, do you want to comment on disruption and stabilization?
Sure. Well, I have a tendency to overmanage, and I guess, Amanda's idea of being more self-aware, I just try to be really aware of that. And that blog post really resonated with me. I was like, yeah, I get it. Leaders are more of the visionary, more the disruptors. Managers are more of the, step-by-step process. And I was like, yeah, I kind of lean on that management side of things. And I see that it's important to keep a balance. And, I want to be sure that I'm keeping an eye towards a larger vision and not there's a lot of details to deal with, but that I try to use those details as stepping stones to the broader vision, and just constantly recalibrating, constantly trying to talk to the team and trust them to manage themselves and to be managers to their directs. So a balance is what I'm always working on.
Great, thank you. And the thing that I've been thinking a lot about this question is making conscious decisions about when you need to be the disruptor and when you need to be the stabilizer. And I think, Amanda was kind of alluding to that, and Amy did just as well, that I think sometimes, especially if you come into a new position, we can approach it, and a new position from any level of an institution, you come in of like, we're going to change it all, and we're just going to jump right in there, like Amy was saying with some of her docent examples. But that there are times when that is what you need to do, and there are times when actually you need to sit back and kind of look and explore that. And so I think I'm constantly going back and forth and having to make decisions. And I don't want to use the old adage, but pick your battles kind of thing, figuring out, and it builds on all the things we were just talking about, where are your allies, where are the places that you as a leader in your institution, again, from any level, can actually make change. And making some small, if change is what you're trying to do, making some small successes give you the opportunity then to launch into those larger things that you might want to do. Changing the culture of an institution is not something that happens overnight. And so, really thinking about how you take those steps to do the kinds of things you need to do, and really being conscious about when you're the disruptor and when you are the stabilizer, because as Amanda said, your team and everyone that's working with you actually needs you to be both. And at different moments, people need you to be different, play different roles in your institutions. And so we have like 1 minute, but I really like to be conscious of time and make sure that we wrap up right on time. And so I think we've addressed most of the questions that have come up on the side, and I just want to thank everyone for being with us this afternoon. Julene noted that all of the links, because people shared lots of wonderful links about transformational leadership and books and resources, they will all get posted with the recording of the Hangout. So if you missed any of those and they disappeared from your bar, they will be there. So I want to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon, and please reach out to any of us. I think our emails are all available on our staff websites, and so if you have other questions, we are totally nerdy about this topic and love to talk about it, and so we want to, as colleagues, to make space for having those conversations. So thank you again for joining us, and we'll keep talking about it. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, bye.